In this video, we're going to have a look at the Develop module and the Basic panel. That is where you're going to be doing a lot of your, if not all, of your processing on your images. So let's have a look at each of the sliders within that panel and see what it does. We're going to start, as always, in the Library module. And I'm going to choose, for example, this image over here. You'll see right now none of these images are selected. I'll click on the one, it gets a little white frame around it. If I now jump to the Develop module, that is the image we're going to be looking at. So with that being said, we go up to the top right hand side of the screen, click on Develop. Now that takes us over into my Develop module. You'll notice on the screen I've hidden the tab on the left hand side here. I can hover my mouse over this triangle to bring it back, but I prefer to hide it out the way. I don't use it all that often. I would rather spend time working on the image and have a bigger area from which I can view that image. Now if I scroll over to the side here, these are all my different panels within the Develop module. Click on the basic triangle, it'll open that up. So let's have a work through these different sliders and see what each of them does. Remember, this is not a workflow on getting the best out of the image. We're just going to look and see what each slider does. White balance is going to be a tutorial on its own. We'll get back to that a little while from now. Let's start with exposure. Exposure is basically what it says. Exposure is how light or dark your image is. With the slider being at 0, this is exactly as it came out of your camera, either JPEG or RAW. From there, I can take the slider, simply click and hold, and drag it to the left, which will make it darker, therefore underexposing, or on the other side, take it up to the right, which overexposes. You can see on the numbers on the side here, plus. So anything to the right hand side will add, to the left hand side will subtract. To get that back to normal, double click. So exposure, how light or dark you want the image. Remember, that's a global change. The entire image will play along. Next one, contrast. Contrast has to do with how bright your brights are in relation to how dark your darks are. So if I'm going to drop my contrast down, which is, to the left, you'll see that the image looks very flat. There's no contrast here. The lights have been made a little bit lighter, the darks, less. The lights have been made darker and the darks lighter, so there's not much contrast or difference between the two. If I take it back to normal, double click, that's where we started. If I now take it back to the other side, to the right hand side, the darks get darker and the lights get lighter. Both case scenarios on either extreme is not ideal. You want to try and play with this. Remember, your goal with wildlife photography is to keep it natural. There's always a place to play with contrast, but for now, down will give you a more flat image and up will give you an image that's, it pops, but it's not ideal because you're dark, you're losing details in the dark areas. Double click back to normal. Right, these next 4 sliders are the new additions to the Lightroom 4 interface, and it's probably one of the most powerful changes they've made in many years. What this is, I'm going to start at the bottom with these, blacks and whites. Now the black slider will, as it says, control the black areas of your image. If you're going to take it down, you're going to increase the blacks, and if you take it up to the right, you're going to decrease some of the blacks. I want you to watch, let me just zoom in for you there, I want you to watch the black part of this penguin's feathers on the side here. If I take it down, which means I'm adding blacks, it's very, very dark and there's almost no detail. You can't see any detail in those black areas. Keep watching that same area on the wing there, take it up to normal, and if I lift my blacks all the way up, remember this is overdone, you can see the detail on the feather, but let's zoom back out, the image looks flat again, there's nothing there. The ideal there is to get the perfect amount of black and the perfect amount of white. So let's have a look at the whites. Zoom in. The white slider is located just above the black. Same thing. If I take it up to the one side, way more bright. So that's way overdone, but now there's pure white in my image. Or then if I want less, all the way down, and it gets flat again. So back to the center. Black controls blacks, whites controls white. Pretty simple. Quick trick while we're here. You can hold your shift key in and double click on the actual cursor, and the computer will automatically try and guess for you what the perfect black point is. Same thing with white. Hold shift and double click. So then you'll see, if we zoom in, you're very close here to pure black and you're very close to pure white in some areas. You can then just go and fine tune this a little bit. Right, let's zoom back out, put those back to normal. The 2 other sliders above white and blacks is shadows and highlights. Now, shadows would be on a scale of black all the way through to white. It'll be the areas just next to black, not pitch black dark, but the darker tones of the image. Let me zoom in on this penguin's face again. If we're going to use the shadows, to the right hand side, I'm going to make them lighter. You see the area around the penguin's eyes and face here. And in the same way, I can go all the way down, which will make it darker again. Same thing applies with highlights. Highlights are the areas that sit just to the left of the whites, so it's not pure white and the bright, bright areas, but it's very close. With highlights, I can lift them up. Let me zoom out for you there. I can lift them up or I can drop them down. So you see most of that happens in the background there for me, because that's where the areas that are not pure white, but they're bright, that's where they're located. So by playing with these 4 sliders, you can work on a beautiful mixture of tonalities in your image, ranging from pure black, shadows, highlights, all the way to pure whites. Very, very powerful and without any loss of details. Let me get them all back to 0. Right, the last 3 here is called presence as a collective. What clarity does, now remember, contrast gave us a flat image because it made the darks lighter and the brights darker to make for less contrast, or then all the way up. What clarity does is very similar. However, watch the difference. If I take clarity all the way down, it gives it like a fuzzy, dreamlike feel. So what clarity does is, on a global scale, it minimizes the contrast in the image, but on all the edges, like for example here on the line, we've got black and blue. We've got 2 tones next to each other. It tries to keep that. And the same thing, if I take it all the way up to the other side, it starts getting like an HDR, a high dynamic range image feel, because it again pushes the global darks darker and the brights brighter, but it focuses on the edges. A lot of people think of clarity as a bit of a local sharpening effect. It is not sharpening, but on a small scale, if we zoom in, I can use clarity to make it look a little bit sharper. Be aware though, if you change your clarity, it does affect the color balance of your image, so you're going to have to fix that afterwards again. Right, let's get clarity back to 0 by double clicking on it. Vibrance. We miss vibrance for a second. Underneath there is saturation. Saturation is exactly what it says. If you take the saturation slider all the way up to the right hand side, Lightroom pushes every single color in this image maximum. It takes everything up as high as it can. You drop saturation to the other side, what do you get when you detract all the saturation from this image? You get a pure black and white image. There's no color in this image. Double click. What Vibrance does now is similar to saturation, but slightly different in the way that it's got an algorithm built in, that Lightroom will look at this image and it will determine which colors are lacking in that image. If you drop it to 0, again, you get a black and white because everything's been removed. But here's a nice trick as well. If you're going to be working on an image and you've done all your other adjustments, start off by punching your vibrance about 15 to 20. It's a nice way for Lightroom to look at the image and punch the necessary images. After that, you're not going to have to touch saturation all that much. You can maybe bump it up a little bit to just get that deeper colors come through, but use saturation with caution. You don't want to overdo it. There's a few things that are immediately distracting in an image. Unsharp, fuzzy, and then one of the other ones as well is oversaturation. It starts looking fake. Remember, your images need to be real, so try and keep it real from there. So that is all the sliders in the basic panel. In the next video, we'll have a look at the tone curve sliders and what they do.